We are so grateful that the Greater Washington Community Foundation saw fit to award Greater Baden funding to help with our response to the coronavirus pandemic.
We are so grateful to the Greater Washington Community Foundation for standing with us as we stand with survivors of sexual violence and creating multiple pathways for their healing journey.
We are thankful to the Community Foundation of Greater Washington for supporting Montgomery Hospice and Prince George's Hospice during this critical time.
During these unprecedented times, we have seen an immense amount of need met by inspiring generosity of neighbors helping neighbors. Our community has come together to raise more than $9 million for the COVID-19 Emergency Response Fund. Your support and partnership allowed us to make strategic investments into our region's nonprofits so that they could respond quickly to the health and economic needs of our community. Together, we helped over 200 local nonprofits expand critical services to serve more families who were facing hardships.
They have helped us to support more than 15 individuals and families to get food, to get rent, to get other needs that they needed to be able to survive.
It's covered technological needs, helped us with our staffing needs during this time, and again, really helped us provide these critical services to help our families weather the storm.
Your support has allowed us to provide toiletry kits and groceries to schools in Ward 7 and Ward 8 on a weekly basis.
This would not have been possible without the support of donors like you. You helped feed families in need. You helped support survivors of domestic violence. You helped provide emergency relief to displaced workers. You helped extend educational opportunities for low-income students. You helped provide shelter and services to people experiencing homelessness. You helped equip frontline workers and expand medical care for marginalized communities. Without our efforts, this pandemic would have been catastrophic for many of our nonprofits and many of our neighbors. Thank you for helping us fight the good fight against poverty, hunger, injustice, and inequities with passion and vigor in the face of a pandemic that has upended daily routines and impacted communities across the world. We would like to say thank you.
Now it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote address. Starting last fall, I had the pleasure of spearheading a board committee that was tasked with selecting a permanent president and CEO to lead the Community Foundation as we chart our new strategic course. And after an extensive search, we are pleased to announce in April the appointment of Tonya Wellens. This will come as no surprise to any of you who have had the pleasure of working with Tonya in her prior role as the Vice President of Community Investment. In that role, Tonya spearheaded multiple initiatives that have had tremendous impact in the region. She led the launch of Voices DMV. I hope you had an opportunity to hear about that, a community listening and engagement initiative that surveyed residents across the region to understand the most pressing issues impacting our region. Based on insights from Voices DMV, Tonya led a refresh of our community investment framework to focus on building thriving communities. Her leadership was also instrumental in building out several community impact initiatives, including the Partnership to End Homelessness in DC, the Children's Opportunity Fund in Montgomery County, and a strategic refresh of our Prince George's County agenda to focus on equity and economic mobility. And more recently, in her role as CEO, Tonya led the Community Foundation as it quickly pivoted to respond to the COVID-19 outbreak and the crisis accompanying that in the Greater Washington region. We have helped to raise over $10 million for coordinated relief and recovery efforts. This is one of the largest philanthropic funds focused on this region, which is a true testament to Tonya's effectiveness as a leader, and we know we need it more now than ever. Please join me in showing Tonya your support and appreciation for her efforts. Tonya?
Good morning, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be in the company, virtual company, of some of you whom I've met and know already, and others who I hope to meet someday soon. As Catherine said, I'm Tonya Wellens, and I am incredibly delighted to serve as the President and CEO of the Greater Washington Community Foundation. I have to admit, when I threw my hat in the ring more than 9 months ago, I wouldn't have predicted that I'd be speaking to you all virtually after 6 months of work from home. I shared with the selection committee my ambitions of raising unprecedented resources that would speak to the capacity of this region, but had no idea of the immediacy of that proclamation. And I successfully convinced the selection committee that I could lead the foundation with confidence and agility, but there were no warnings that every single skill I've ever attained would be called upon or put to the test within 6 months of taking on the role. So I want to start by saying, sharing my gratitude for this opportunity and to say thank you to everyone who's been a part of the journey so far. My first thank you, however, is to the selection committee. Catherine did a great job of describing my professional background and some of my accomplishments at the Community Foundation so far. I think I've had some of the best work experiences that anybody could ask for, and I am so grateful for so many rich experiences. And while I did not grow up with the silver spoon in my mouth, I did grow up in a community that supported me and in a family that nurtured me. My parents completed high school in the mid-60s. My dad finished in the segregated school, and my mom's class was integrated her senior year. They both attended community college for a short stint before deciding to marry and go directly to work. After a few years in the workforce, they found themselves at the same company, for 30 years I might add, a factory called Allied Chemical. This company offered a fair hourly wage, health insurance, paid leave, and a pension. These jobs afforded my family a solid middle-class lifestyle. I can't say that we had everything we wanted, but when I walked in the door every day after school, we certainly had everything we needed. This offered an amazing springboard for my sisters and me for a bright future. So much of the work we have the privilege of doing here at the Community Foundation resonates for me personally. Advocacy around fair wages and affordable housing, support for children, youth, and families, investments in education and scholarships, support for the arts and in entrepreneurs, the kinds of investments that stabilize families and communities and offer springboards. Since 1973, the Community Foundation and our community of givers has collectively invested more than $1.3 billion, that's billion with a B, to support and strengthen our community, including $68 million in annual grants just this last year, of which 71% were made to organizations in the Greater Washington region. My second thank you is to you, our donors and partners, for creating positive change for our community. Our foundation disperses more philanthropic capital than any other foundation in the region. We're able to do this because of your generosity, because of amazing partnerships with local government, and in partnership with our peers in philanthropy. There are so many inspiring stories that bubble up from our community of givers that demonstrate the power and potential of community philanthropy. Just last year, when we launched the Partnership to End Homelessness, which, as you've heard already, is a public-private partnership between our Community Foundation and the District of Columbia government, a longtime donor, Dan Mayers, issued a challenge to our board of trustees and to his friends and family. He pledged $100,000 to instigate raising $1 million, which we did. Dan's pledge demonstrated the commitment of our fund holders to not only support their personal interest causes, but to partner with us to support initiatives led by our staff and team. It was an ambitious goal, and the commitment of our fund holders that captured the attention of the Clark Foundation and encouraged their $1 million grant towards the Partnership to End Homelessness. Your commitment has allowed us to support people experiencing homelessness, transition from shelters into permanent supportive housing, much like the housing that David and Rob described. It's helped us to cover costs like security deposits, transportation to view units, amenities fees, the recovery of personal documents like driver's license and birth certificates, things that get lost when you're living on the streets, but things we know are stabilizing, even springboards. My third thank you is to Terry Beatty and the other 68 donors who have made their legacy intentions known to the Community Foundation. Earlier this spring, we featured Terry's generosity and shared his story of giving, of both his time and his treasure. Terry's mother worked for the New York Community Trust, a parallel to our foundation, and so he fully understands the multiplier effect of a community foundation. Terry is a senior advisor and portfolio manager at Brown Advisory. And so he understands the value of smart and strategic investments. Terry and his family established their fund at the Community Foundation in 1995, and he went on to chair our Board of Trustees Investment Committee, which he only recently stepped down from serving after many years. But prior to transitioning, he and his wife, Ann, made an even longer term commitment to the Community Foundation. They established a bequest entrusting 1/3 of the Beatty family fund to us. Their bequest is completely unrestricted, meaning funds can be used for core operating expenses, a resource that is so essential to our work to addressing the greatest needs in community. He hopes that his money will help us remain financially strong and stable and offer a pathway for other donors to give directly to causes and people who need it. Unlike the New York Community Trust, who has a sizable endowment, our Community Foundation, unfortunately, is one of the least endowed in the country. But this is something I plan to change during my tenure as president. I penned a Washington Post article last year that notes how we are punching below our weight compared to the rest of the country when it comes to our giving capacity. Now, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about your friends. And my hope is that our work together in partnership with you will inspire them to trust us and to work with us. But to Terry's point, funding the core for now and for the future is important and necessary if we are to be relevant, timely, and responsive to community needs. This kind of responsiveness came in handy in March, when we were just 5 days away from our annual meeting, our annual celebration of philanthropy, where we'd intended to honor the A. James and Alice B. Clark Foundation for their generosity to our community. In the face of a global health pandemic, we were forced to make the hard and appropriate decision to cancel our annual event and pivot quickly to emergency response. Our team, as you know, decided to honor our commitments by paying all the vendors for the event, including the performers, many of whom have not performed publicly since. We donated the flowers and the food to a homeless shelter, and we used the proceeds from ticket sales to open our COVID-19 Emergency Response Fund. On March 13th, we moved to remote work and figured out how to run our entire business during one of the busiest periods of our organization's history from our homes. I want to thank you, our staff, our peers in philanthropy, and the broader community for standing with us during our community's greatest time of need. Over the last 6 months, as Catherine mentioned already, we raised more than $10 million for our coordinated regional response efforts. This has helped to put food on the table, cover rent and other needs, get access to medical care, find shelter, make the transition to remote learning, and so much more. It's helped families to do all of those things. Our team spent countless hours listening to nonprofits, talking to local government, coordinating with our donors, fielding calls from people in need and organizations fearful about the future. The regional effort came together in coordination with our peers and longtime partners in philanthropy. who joined forces with us, including the Meyer Foundation, Bainham Family Foundation, the Marriott Foundation, Horning Family Fund, Diane and Norman Bernstein Foundation, and Prince Charitable Trust, just to name a few. And our effort caught the attention of lots of new philanthropic partners like Amazon and Pivotal Ventures, the O'Neill Foundation, the World Bank Group, and the Gates Foundation. They all pitched in. The financial services community also played a role. PNC, Capital Bank, Capital One, Wells Fargo, as did the private sector writ large, from Comcast and Target and PepsiCo to Washington Gas, Deloitte, Booz Allen Hamilton, Venable, Lockheed Martin, just again to name a few. We worked very closely with Rosie at the United Way, with County Executive Angela Alsobrooks, with Mayor Bowser, and the Montgomery County Council. This community stepped up. Their faith in us is a real tribute to you. In addition to our corporate and institutional partners, we have so many examples of neighbors helping neighbors to weather this crisis. In Montgomery County, our own Cliff White teamed up with our past county honorees to launch a special Neighbors in Dire Need challenge match, doubling the impact of contributions so that key nonprofit partners could help our most vulnerable neighbors address their emergency needs. In Prince George's County, Sam Brin, brother of Google co-founder Sergey Brin, both of whom were raised in Prince George's County and attended Prince George's County Public Schools, worked with us to invest more than $1.6 million to expand food access, address educational needs, and support the local business community. Just last week, we received a $1 million contribution from IKEA as a reimbursement to the community for unemployment claims that were made by their employees for both Montgomery and Prince George's counties. The layoffs were due to COVID-related layoffs, of course. And as we understand it, the governor's office and IKEA were advised to partner with us because they knew we would best know how to invest those resources locally. There are many others who sought to stabilize our community, from individual donors who made $5, $10, and $50 gifts, to those of you who made interfund transfers, activated disaster relief funds, increased your company's giving, or organized your own social circles. Thank you again for trusting us with your giving. And in parallel to our COVID-19 response funds, many of you established aligned efforts to respond to specific needs in impacted populations, like Care First, who established a fund to provide PPE to small health providers that are ranked high on the Social Vulnerability Index, or Bernstein Management Corporation, who established a fund to provide cash assistance to low-income tenants. Fabio Trabocci, Clyde's, Call Your Mother Deli, they all set up relief funds to support workers facing layoffs and increased medical costs. We partnered with Ed Forward DC to establish the DC Education Equity Fund to help families bridge the digital divide by who were transitioning to distance learning. And we recently partnered with Montgomery County government to launch Food for Montgomery to ensure that every family will have access to food and to strengthen our food system permanently. Our friends at Capritz Foundation and 8 other grant makers seeded the Arts Forward Fund to help underserved theaters and artists survive this transition period. Throughout this crisis, we have made it a point to support Black and Brown-led organizations and Black and Brown communities with intention, because we understood the disproportionate impact. We funded nonprofit health providers and their pivot to telemedicine. Excuse me. We put cash in the hands of our neighbors, many of whom were low-waged, gig economy workers or restaurant workers, to give them agency in a little more time and security to navigate these uncharted waters. With your support, we stabilize the nonprofit sector and who are our critical partners in this work. And then, as if the global health pandemic and the ensuing economic crisis were not enough, on March 25th, we all watched the tragic murder of George Floyd. His murder intensified the calls for police accountability and racial justice. Because we were under stay-at-home orders, this time it hit a little differently. You know, this is a topic that's incredibly important to me. I have a 15-year-old son, and many of you have kids, and we want to rest assured that they're going to be safe in their homes, neighborhoods, and on the streets. But this brutal murder has forced us all to examine our own biases, systemic racism, and the complex systems of oppression that Black and brown people in America are subjected to. After 3 years of advocacy, it suddenly became apparent that all lives matter when Black lives matter. The Community Foundation has been a social justice advocate and a racial equity instigator for many years now. Under Terry Freeman's leadership, we initiated the Putting Race on the Table series when discussing race was unpopular. Under Bruce McNamer's leadership, we launched Voices DMV and made a deliberate decision to center community voice in the development of our Building Thriving Communities framework. We committed to an agenda to disrupt poverty, to deepen culture and human connection, and to focus on the future of work and workers. We also decided to center racial equity as we examine our own internal operations and external efforts. The framework for building thriving communities feels more relevant today than ever before. The current trifecta of crises, global health pandemic, an economic downturn, and the causes of racial justice in our democracy require our deep commitment and our ongoing response. It requires that we continue to work in partnership and bring our best selves and resources and tools to reconstruct a more equitable region, one where race is no longer a predictor of outcomes, nor zip code a marker of safety, quality education, healthy foods, good jobs, or affordable housing. So I look forward to working with you to build thriving communities in the Greater Washington region, where we must redress past wrongs, stabilize those in need, and offer springboards that lead to life, liberty, and happiness. And so now we are beginning to explore how we can continue to make an impact as we embark upon our next strategic planning process. There are so many questions that I look forward to exploring with you, like, what will it mean to be a social justice instigator or leader for racial equity in 2020 and beyond? What must we do as a community to move from crisis response to stability? How can we ensure that good jobs, like the ones my parents had, that offered us a springboard to the middle class, are not just a thing of the past? How can we inspire this community to give to capacity and to give as though people who are experiencing homelessness are in a crisis every single day? How can we, as the Community Foundation in our nation's capital, center the causes of democracy and equity and justice for all, and serve as an example for the broader country? These are the questions I look forward to exploring with you. Actually, I'll take a moment now and pause and invite you to offer a question to offer a mention in the chat box. Which things or issues do you think are worth exploring as we plan for the future? This is your time. You can drop a few things in the chat box and we can reference them now. Pretty slow moving. Let's see if there's anything. Any ideas about what we ought to be thinking about? Okay, we'll get to the conversation then a little bit later. Thank you. Food insecurity, I see that popping up as an important topic for us to explore. I absolutely agree. Regional interconnectivity, absolutely. There are so many times where we function in our unique jurisdiction, but there are so many things that connect us as a region, as well as acknowledging the unique needs of each state. It's such a tricky, tricky interplay to think about what we need in jurisdictions and then what we need across the entire region. Such an interesting challenge and opportunity for a regional organization. All right, well, we'll have more time. What in mind for improved technological access to funds? Absolutely, thank you for raising that. That is actually one of my very top priorities, is to strengthen our technology infrastructure at the Community Foundation so that donors can make their grant recommendations more quickly and more smoothly, and have more real-time access to fund balance information. Engaging younger folks, absolutely. We're very excited that there have been 2 new funding circles or giving circles that have been launched in the last 9 months. One in Prince George's County, the Emerging Leaders Impact Fund, and another one that's DC focused. It's the Next Generation Fund. Very excited about both of them. Donating on a mobile device, absolutely. I'm in the process now of hiring a new COO, and these technology and giving improvements are top of the priority list. Maternal health, very exciting about the work that we'll get to do with a new maternal health fund that is coming to the Community Foundation in the next year. These are all great. Mentions. It is such a pleasure to work for a foundation, especially as a generalist like me, where you're interested and care about everything, because all of these issues are important and resonate. Care for seniors, ensuring a skilled workforce that's ready and able for work, absolutely. Thank you all for this. I appreciate it. This is amazing. So now I want to offer a final thank you to each of you for sharing your passion for philanthropy and your service with us. We remain committed to working with you to build more equitable, just, and enriching communities where all of our neighbors can live, work, and thrive. I look forward to making our Community Foundation one that you will continue to trust and one that becomes a shining example for our country. I'd like to offer a final thanks to the Community Foundation staff, to our nonprofit partners, to trustees, to our fund holders, our partners in philanthropy, and to my parents for taking time out of your busy schedules and joining us today. Thank you. So very quickly, before we transition to the Q&A section and to the Ask Me Anything sections of our program today, I have 3 asks. I invite you to all sign up for our upcoming Voices DMV on the Table conversations on October 1. You can learn more and you can sign up. You can actually host a conversation yourself, or you can participate in one of ours at voicesdmv.org. I ask you to tell your friends and your family about the Greater Washington Community Foundation and invite them to open a fund and join us on this journey. And finally, I ask that you check in on your neighbors. The last few months have been incredibly difficult for a lot of people. A kind word or a warm gesture can really go a long way these days. Again, thank you very much.